The silence in the CEO office on the 45th floor of the Vertex Dynamics building was cold enough to freeze water. My son Jason sat in the leather guest chair picking at a loose thread on his expensive suit cuff. He looked smug. He looked like a man who was about to be handed the keys to the kingdom. He checked his watch, tapped his foot, and smiled at his reflection in the glass window that overlooked the Chicago skyline. He thought he had won. He thought his promotion to regional director was in the bag. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. Jason jumped to his feet, smoothing his tie, putting on that fake, eager smile I had watched him practice in the mirror for years. Alexander Holloway, the CEO of Vertex Dynamics, walked in. Holloway was a shark in a three-piece suit, a man who ate competitors for breakfast. But today, he did not look at Jason. He turned back to the door he had just opened and held it. He held it open with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. Jason frowned, confused. Then I walked in. I was wearing a gray maintenance jumpsuit stained with industrial cleaner. My work boots left faint, dusty prints on the plush carpet. I held a mop bucket in one hand. Jason's eyes bulged. His face went from confusion to pure, unadulterated horror. He hissed at me, his voice a low, venomous whisper. "Get out. Get out of here right now, you senile old fool. You are embarrassing me." He took a step toward me, his hand raised as if to shove me back into the hallway. Holloway slammed his hand down on the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Sit down, Jason." Jason froze. "But sir, this is the janitor. He is my father, unfortunately, and he is clearly lost. I will remove him immediately." Holloway did not sit. He walked over to me and took the mop bucket from my hand, setting it aside. He looked at Jason with eyes like ice. "He is not the janitor, Jason. He is the man who hired me 20 years ago. And he is the man who owns 51% of the chair you are sitting in." Holloway turned to me, bowing his head slightly. "Mr. King, the board is waiting for your decision. How would you like to handle this employee?" I looked at my son. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. I didn't smile. I didn't yell. I just looked at him. 3 months ago, he told me I was a burden. Today, I was going to show him exactly how heavy a burden can be. Before I tell you what happened next, please tell me in the comments where you are watching this story from. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Bernard King. I am 72 years old, and this is how I taught my son the hardest lesson of his life. Let's go back 90 days. The kitchen table was sticky. It always was. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, had a habit of buying expensive cleaning products, but never actually using them. I sat in the corner seat, the one with the wobbly leg, chewing on a piece of toast that had gone stale 2 days ago. I didn't complain. I had learned that complaining only led to shouting, and shouting led to threats of eviction. Brittany stormed into the kitchen and slammed a piece of paper onto the table. It slid across the sticky surface and stopped right next to my water glass. It was the heating bill. She stood over me, hands on her hips, her acrylic nails tapping a furious rhythm against her waist. "Look at this, Bernard. Just look at it. $450. Do you have any idea how much money that is?" "Of course you don't. You just sit here all day turning up the thermostat because your old bones get chilly." I looked at the bill. It was high, yes. But it was January in Chicago. I kept the thermostat at 68 degrees, just enough to stop my fingers from going numb. I looked up at her. "Brittany, I wear 2 sweaters. I barely touch the dial." "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "I hear the furnace kicking on all night. We cannot afford this. Jason and I are trying to maintain a lifestyle here. We have appearances to keep up. We have dinners to host. We cannot be bleeding cash because you want to live in a sauna." Jason walked in then. He looked tired, or at least he pretended to be. He loosened his tie and threw his keys into the bowl. He didn't say hello to me. He walked straight to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and looked at the bill Brittany was pointing at. "It is too much, Dad," Jason said, taking a long swig of beer. "Brittany is right. We are bleeding dry." I put my toast down. The bread felt like ash in my mouth. "Son, I give you my entire Social Security check every month. It is $1,200. That should cover my share of the heat and a little food." Jason laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound. $1,200, Dad, that barely covers the gas for my car and the internet bill. You have no concept of inflation. You have no concept of what it costs to be a professional in this city. I have to look successful to be successful. That means gym memberships, tailored suits, networking dinners. Your little check is a drop in the bucket." He sat down opposite me, leaning forward. His eyes were hard. "Listen, Dad. We need to have a serious talk. I have an opportunity at work. Vertex Dynamics is looking for a new regional director. If I get this promotion, our money problems are over. But to get it, I need to buy into the internal investment pool. I need capital." I stayed silent. I knew where this was going. 5 years ago, Jason had come to me crying. He had gambling debts. Serious ones. People were threatening to break his legs. I had sold my house, the house I built with my late wife, to pay off his debt. I gave him nearly $500,000. I told him I had lost the house in a bad investment, so he wouldn't feel the guilt of ruining my retirement. I moved in with him, pretending to be a broke pensioner, hoping he would appreciate the sacrifice. He never did. He thought he had just gotten lucky that the loan sharks disappeared. "I don't have any money, Jason," I said quietly. "You know this. I know you don't," Jason spat out. "That is the problem. You are a dead weight. You are an extra mouth to feed. And frankly, I am tired of it. I am tired of seeing you moping around here, eating our food, using our heat, and contributing nothing but a pittance from the government." Brittany chimed in, crossing her arms. "We are thinking of turning your room into a home office for Jason. He needs a space to focus if he is going to get this promotion. The basement has a cot. You could sleep down there." The basement was unfinished. It was damp, freezing, and smelled of mold. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say no. "Brittany, he is my father. He sleeps upstairs." Jason just shrugged. "It is warmer down there near the furnace, Dad. It makes sense." My heart didn't break. It had broken years ago. This was just the dust settling. I took a sip of water. "I understand," I said. "I will move my things tonight." "No," Jason said, holding up a hand. "That is not enough. Moving to the basement doesn't put money in my pocket. I need you to be useful. I need you to work." "Work," I looked at my hands. They were spotted with age, slightly tremulous. "I am 72, Jason. Who is going to hire me?" "I already took care of that," Jason said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a crumpled application form. He tossed it onto the table. It landed next to the heating bill. "Vertex Dynamics is firing their cleaning contractor and hiring in-house janitorial staff to cut costs." I spoke to the hiring manager in HR. I told him my father is bored at home and needs something to do. "I pulled a lot of strings for this, Dad. It was embarrassing, honestly, having to beg for a job for you, but they agreed to take you on a trial basis." I looked down at the form. The logo of Vertex Dynamics stared back at me. A stylized V inside a circle. I knew that logo. I sketched the original design on a napkin in a diner in 1992. I built the business model that Vertex used to dominate the market. I hired Alexander Halloway fresh out of business school because I saw a spark in him. I retired 10 years ago and vanished into the background, leaving Halloway to run the ship while I remained the silent majority shareholder. Nobody at the company knew my face anymore. To them, Bernard King was just a name on the old incorporation papers, a myth. Jason tapped the paper. "It is the night shift mostly. Cleaning toilets, mopping the lobby, taking out the trash. Minimum wage, but it adds up. If you work 60 hours a week, you can bring in enough to actually help this family. Brittany sneered. And it gets him out of the house. I am tired of seeing him sitting there in his armchair like a piece of old furniture. I looked at the application. Janitor. They wanted the man who built the empire to clean its toilets. I looked at Jason. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. If I refused, I would be on the street. I could have revealed everything right then. I could have told him I had millions in offshore accounts, that I owned the roof over his head. But I looked at his face. It was twisted with greed and entitlement. He didn't need money. He needed a lesson that would burn. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. Okay, I said. I will do it. I will take the job. Jason let out a sigh of relief, then a short, mocking laugh. Good. Finally. At least you are good for something. Just one rule, Dad. And this is non-negotiable. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale beer. At the office, you do not call me son. You do not talk to me. If anyone asks you are a distant relative I am doing a favor for. I am a manager, Dad. I have a reputation. If people find out my father is the guy scrubbing the urinals, I will be the laughingstock of the department. You are Mr. King, the janitor. I am Mr. King, the manager. We are strangers. Do you understand? I looked him in the eye. The son I raised. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The man I sold my home to save. I understand, Mr. King, I said softly. Excellent, Jason stood up, clapping his hands together. He grabbed the heating bill. I will take this out of your first paycheck. Welcome to the workforce, Dad. Try not to screw it up. He walked out of the kitchen, Brittany following him, giggling. They started talking about what they would buy with the extra money I would bring in. I sat alone in the kitchen, the silence settling around me like a heavy blanket. I looked at the Vertex logo again. I wasn't going there to clean toilets. I was going there to watch. I was going there to see exactly who my son was when he thought no one of consequence was looking. And then, when the time was right, I was going to clean house. But not in the way he thought. The next morning, the humiliation began in earnest. Jason drove me to the office, but he refused to drop me off at the front entrance. He pulled the car into the delivery alley 3 blocks away from the glass revolving doors of Vertex Dynamics. It was raining a cold, biting Chicago drizzle that soaked through my thin coat instantly. Get out here, Jason said, not even unlocking the doors until he had scanned the street to make sure no colleagues were around. You can walk the rest of the way. And remember, use the service elevator. I don't want to see you in the lobby. I stepped out into a puddle of oily water. Before I could even close the door, Jason peeled away his tires, screeching, eager to distance himself from his own father. I walked the 3 blocks, head down the rain dripping from the brim of my old hat. When I arrived at the service entrance, the security guard, a burly man named Mike, looked at my paperwork. He frowned. You are the new guy. You look a little old for this work, Pop. It is heavy lifting. I need the money, Mike, I said, forcing a weak smile. My son, he has high standards. Mike shook his head, buzzing me in. Good luck, Pop. You're going to need it. This place eats people alive. I went down to the basement to change. The uniform they gave me was 2 sizes too big. It was a stiff blue polyester jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and someone else's sweat. I put it on. I looked in the cracked mirror above the utility sink. Bernard King, former titan of industry, now looking like a convict. I adjusted the collar. It scratched my neck. My supervisor was a woman named Dolores. She was tough with hands like leather and a voice that could cut glass. She handed me a mop and a bucket on wheels. King, right. You start on the 2nd floor. Bathrooms, then the break room, then the hallways. And stay out of the way. The executives get cranky if they have to step around a wet floor sign. I spent the first 4 hours of my shift on my knees. I scrubbed grout. I polished porcelain. I emptied trash cans filled with half-eaten sandwiches that cost more than my weekly food budget. My back screamed in protest. My knees felt like they were filled with broken glass. But I kept my head down and my eyes open. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was mopping the hallway outside the open-plan office where Jason worked. I saw him sitting at his desk. He was laughing loudly, spinning in his chair, throwing a foam football to a colleague. He wasn't working. He was posturing. I pushed my cart slowly past the glass wall. Jason saw me. His smile vanished instantly. He glared at me, mouthing the words, "Go away." I moved on, turning the corner into the executive conference room. It was empty, or so I thought. Papers were scattered across the long oak table. A whiteboard was covered in complex diagrams and financial projections. I recognized the project immediately. It was the Orion Initiative, a logistics overhaul I had drafted the framework for 15 years ago. They were finally trying to implement it. I moved closer to the whiteboard. I couldn't help myself. I looked at the numbers. They were wrong. The profit margin calculation was based on an outdated variable. If they launched like this, the company would lose $3 million in the first quarter. I looked around. The room was silent. The security camera in the corner blinked a slow red eye. I knew the blind spots. I stepped into the shadow of a bookshelf, picked up a dry erase marker, and quickly corrected the equation. I changed a 7 to a 3 and added a footnote about the shipping variable. It took 10 seconds. I put the marker back and hurried out, my heart pounding faster than it had in years. It was a thrill I hadn't felt since my boardroom days. The next day, the atmosphere in the office was electric. I was emptying the recycling bins near the water cooler when I heard Jason bragging to a group of junior analysts. "Yeah, I stayed late last night reviewing the Orion numbers," Jason said, puffing out his chest. "I caught a massive error in the margin calculations. Saved the department a fortune. Holloway himself sent me an email this morning praising my attention to detail." One of the analysts whistled. "Nice catch, Jason. That puts you in the lead for the promotion, doesn't it?" Jason smirked. "It is practically mine. I just have the eye for this stuff, you know. Some people have it, some don't." I stood there holding a bag of trash, watching my son steal credit for my work. He hadn't stayed late. He had been home by 6, complaining that dinner wasn't ready. He hadn't caught the error. He wouldn't know a margin variable if it bit him. But he was taking the praise. He looked over and saw me. His eyes narrowed. He walked over, pretending to throw a paper cup into my bin. He leaned close to my ear. "What are you looking at, old man? Keep moving. You are making the place smell like cabbage." I gripped the trash bag tighter. "Congratulations on the Orion fix, Mr. King," I whispered. He froze. He looked at me with genuine fear for a second. Then he realized. You touched the whiteboard." I nodded slightly. The variable was wrong. Jason's face turned red. "Don't you ever touch my work again. You are a janitor. You clean up filth. You don't think. If anyone finds out you were in there, I will have you fired. Do you hear me?" He stormed off, leaving me standing there. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer a share of the bonus he would surely get. He just threatened me. That night, Jason came home with a bottle of expensive whiskey. He poured drinks for himself and Brittany. He was jubilant. "They are giving me a $5,000 bonus for the catch on the Orion project," he announced. Brittany squealed and hugged him. "We are going to book a trip to Cabo," she yelled. Finally, I was in the kitchen washing their dishes. Jason walked in, took a $20 bill from his wallet, and crumpled it up. He threw it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. "Here, Dad. Buy yourself some new soap. You stink." I looked at the bill on the floor. I looked at my son. "Thank you." "Mr. King," I said. I bent down and picked it up. Not because I needed it, but because I needed him to see me kneel. I needed him to believe he had total power. Because the higher he climbed on the ladder I built, the further he would fall when I pulled it out from under him. The abuse didn't stop there. It escalated. A week later, Brittany was rummaging through my room while I was at work. She was looking for anything valuable she could sell. She found my old leather notebook. It was tattered, the pages yellowed. To her, it looked like garbage. To me, it was everything. It contained the original codes for the Vertex operating system, the contact numbers for the private Swiss bankers, and the access keys to the family trust. When I came home, I found the notebook in the trash can, torn in half, covered in coffee grounds. Brittany was in the living room painting her toenails. I found some old junk in your room, Bernard. I cleared it out. You are hoarding trash. It is a fire hazard. I pulled the notebook from the garbage. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just paper. This was my legacy. Why were you in my room? I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I struggled to suppress. It is my house, Bernard, she shouted back. I can go wherever I want. And stop digging in the trash. It is disgusting. I took the wet, ruined notebook to the basement. I carefully dried the pages with a towel. Most of the ink was still legible. I sat on my cot under the humming furnace and dialed a number on my burner phone. A number I hadn't called in 10 years. It rang twice. Hello? A crisp, professional voice answered. Cole, it is Bernard. There was a pause. Mr. King, my God, sir. We haven't heard from you since the transition. Is everything all right, no, Cole? Everything is far from all right. I need you to activate the Omega Protocol. The Omega Protocol, sir, that is the nuclear option. That freezes all assets, initiates a forensic audit of the subsidiary branches, and prepares for a hostile takeover of the board. Are you sure? I looked at the water stains on my notebook. I looked up at the ceiling where my son and his wife were laughing at a reality TV show. I am sure. I also need you to look into Jason King and Brittany King. I want a full financial autopsy. Every credit card transaction, every hidden debt, every stolen penny. And Cole. Yes, sir. Get Alexander Holloway on the line. Tell him his old boss is coming out of retirement. And tell him to meet me in the supply closet on the 45th floor tomorrow at noon. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. And Jason was a very hungry mouse. The silence inside Jason's leased Audi was suffocating. It was 6:30 in the morning, the sky a bruised purple over the Chicago skyline. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded in my lap, careful not to touch the pristine leather dashboard. Jason drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if he were transporting illegal contraband instead of his own father. He had turned the radio up, a low thrum of aggressive stock market news, filling the space between us, ensuring we didn't have to speak. I watched the city pass by. I knew these streets better than the back of my hand. I knew which skyscrapers were built on solid loans and which ones were leverage traps. I knew the flow of money in this city. But right now, I didn't have a dime in my pocket for lunch. 2 blocks from the gleaming glass tower of Vertex Dynamics, Jason swerved the car abruptly toward the curb. We were in the shadow of an old brick warehouse near a row of overflowing dumpsters. This was not the employee entrance. This was the drop-off point for shame. He put the car in park but kept the engine running. He didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead at the brick wall. "Get out here," he said. His voice was tight, vibrating with a nervous energy that I recognized. It was fear. He was terrified that anyone might see us together. I reached for the door handle, my old joints protesting the cold, damp air seeping in. Before I could open it, Jason's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by desperation. "Wait," he hissed. "We need to be clear about the rules of engagement before you step foot in that building." I looked at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face. He looked manic. "I am listening, Mr. King," I said, testing the waters. He didn't flinch at the formal title. In fact, he seemed to relax slightly. "Exactly. That is exactly it. Listen to me, old man. Inside those walls, you are a ghost. You do not speak to me unless I speak to you first, which I won't. You do not wave at me in the hallway. You do not smile at me in the cafeteria. And under no circumstances, absolutely none, do you ever call me son." He squeezed my wrist tighter. "I have worked too hard to build my brand at Vertex. I am on the short list for the regional director position. If the board finds out my father is the guy unclogging the toilets on the first floor, I am finished. Do you understand perception is reality in corporate America? If I look like I come from trash, they will treat me like trash." I pulled my wrist free. "I raised you better than to call honest work trash, Jason," he sneered, turning his face away. "Save the moral superiority for the shelter, because that is where you will be sleeping if you mess this up. One slip-up, one moment of senile confusion where you call me Jason in front of a VP, and I will throw your clothes on the lawn and change the locks before you can blink. You wanted a job. You got one. Now be invisible." I opened the door and stepped out into the cold morning mist. The car sped away before I had even fully closed the door, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights of the car I paid for fade into the traffic. I adjusted my coat collar and began the long walk to the service entrance. The service entrance was a heavy steel door next to the loading dock. It smelled of diesel fumes and rotting vegetables. I buzzed the intercom and was buzzed in without a word. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of industrial bleach and floor wax. I navigated the concrete corridors to the basement locker room. It was a windowless box filled with dented metal lockers and a bench that looked like it had survived a war. My uniform was hanging on a hook. It was a blue polyester jumpsuit, stiff with starch, the fabric rough against my skin. It was 2 sizes too big. I took off my street clothes, folding them neatly into my locker. As I pulled the blue jumpsuit on, I felt a strange transformation. The moment I zipped it up, Bernard King, the strategist, the investor, the father, ceased to exist. I looked in the cracked mirror. A gray-haired, tired man in a blue worksuit stared back. I was anonymous. I was part of the furniture. I was the help. I pinned my name tag to my chest. It just said Bernard. No last name. Just a first name like a child or a pet. My shift supervisor, a woman who looked like she hadn't smiled since the 90s, pointed to a cart in the corner. "Grab your gear. You're on the first floor today. Main lobby restrooms and the visitor lounge. Make it shine. The big bosses are coming through later." I pushed the heavy cart toward the elevator. The wheels squeaked with a rhythmic, piercing sound that announced my arrival, like a sad trumpet. I rode the service elevator up to the lobby level. The doors opened, and the noise of the morning rush hit me. Phones ringing, heels clicking on marble, the hum of ambition. I kept my head down, pushing my cart toward the men's restroom near the main reception. I passed young executives in suits that cost more than my son's car. They didn't even see me. They walked around me like I was a pylon or a wet floor sign. I was an obstacle, not a person. I entered the restroom. It was a mess. Paper towels littered the floor. Someone had spilled coffee on the counter. The air was heavy with the smell of artificial pine trying to mask biological reality. I took a deep breath. I had negotiated mergers worth billions. I had stared down federal regulators. I could clean a toilet. I got down on my knees. The tile was hard and cold, the pain shooting through my arthritic joints immediately. I dipped the rag into the bucket of disinfectant water. The water turned gray instantly. I started scrubbing the grout, the motion repetitive and numbing. As I cleaned, the door opened. 2 men walked in talking loudly about quarterly projections. I recognized the jargon. They were talking about the logistics division. They were wrong about their estimates, but I bit my tongue. I scrubbed harder. "Hey, watch the shoes, pal," one of them snapped as he stepped near my bucket. "Sorry, sir," I mumbled, not looking up. They finished their business and left, not even washing their hands. I stood up, my knees cracking, and moved to the mirrors. I sprayed the glass and wiped it down. In the reflection, I saw the door open again. It was Jason. He walked in, checking his hair in the mirror I had just polished. He adjusted his tie, practicing a winning smile. Then he saw me in the reflection. His smile dropped. He spun around. "What are you doing here?" he whispered aggressively. "I am doing my job, Mr. King," I said, wringing out my rag. "Cleaning the mirrors." "Get out," he hissed. "I have a meeting with the VP of Sales in 10 minutes. I need to use this facility. I can't have you hovering around like a specter. Go clean something else." "This is my assigned zone," I said calmly. "I don't care. Move. Go to the basement. Go anywhere but here. You are making me nervous." He pointed at the door. I looked at him. He was sweating. He was terrified that his colleagues would see him talking to the janitor. He was ashamed of me. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because my existence threatened his facade of perfection. I put my rag in the bucket. "As you wish, sir." I pushed my cart past him. As I did, he deliberately stuck his foot out. The wheel of my cart caught his polished shoe. I stumbled, barely keeping my balance. "Watch where you are going," he shouted loud enough for anyone in the hallway to hear. "Clumsy idiot." I gripped the handle of the cart. I didn't apologize this time. I just walked out. But as I turned the corner, I made a mental note. Strike one. My son had just kicked the foundation of his own life, and he didn't even know it yet. I pushed the cart down the hall, my resolve hardening with every squeak of the wheel. The game had begun. The silence of the 45th floor at 2 in the morning was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. The air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous drone, the heartbeat of the sleeping building. I pushed my cleaning cart down the long carpeted corridor of the executive wing. The wheels, usually squeaky, were muffled by the plush pile that cost more per square yard than my son's entire wardrobe. I was alone. The ambitious young analysts had gone home to their overpriced apartments. The security guards were dozing in the lobby. For the first time all day, I didn't have to look at the floor. I didn't have to hunch my shoulders to make myself smaller. I stood tall, my back straightening, as I walked past the mahogany doors with gold nameplates. I reached the main conference room. The strategy room. This was the brain of Vertex Dynamics. It was a glass-walled aquarium where careers were made or destroyed in hour-long increments. I swiped my janitorial keycard. The lock clicked, a sound of permission that felt ironic, given my current station. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me instantly. Stale coffee, dry erase marker fumes, and the lingering metallic scent of stress. The room was a disaster. Pizza boxes were stacked in the corner, grease soaking through the cardboard. Crumpled balls of paper littered the floor like fallen soldiers. And there, dominating the entire north wall, was the whiteboard. It was covered in red and black ink. Diagrams, flowcharts, revenue projections. At the top, written in bold, frantic letters, were the words, Project RAS Phase 1. This was Jason's baby. This was the project he had been losing sleep over, the golden ticket he had been bragging about at the dinner table while Brittany complained about the price of organic kale. I began to sweep the floor, my movements mechanical, but my eyes kept drifting to the board. I tried to look away. I tried to focus on the pizza crusts and the empty soda cans. I was just the help. I was the ghost in the machine, invisible and irrelevant. But the numbers called to me. They were a language I had spoken fluently for 40 years, and something about the syntax on that board was screaming in pain. I leaned my broom against the wall and stepped closer. I scanned the columns of projected logistics costs. I looked at the scalability ratios. My eyes narrowed. Jason had based the entire profit margin on a static shipping variable. He had assumed fuel costs would remain flat over a 5-year trajectory. In this economy, it was suicide. Worse, he had miscalculated the amortization of the new server farms. He was off by a factor of 10. I followed the red line of his projection. It shot upward like a rocket. But based on his faulty math, the reality would be a nosedive into a crater. If he presented this to the board tomorrow, Alexander Halloway wouldn't just fire him. He would laugh him out of the industry. Halloway had an eye like a hawk for bad data. He would spot that amortization error in 3 seconds. I stood there looking at my son's handwriting. It was messy, rushed. I could see the desperation in the way he pressed the marker too hard against the board. He was drowning, and he didn't even know it. My first instinct was to walk away. Let him fail. Let him stand in front of Halloway and be torn apart. It would be justice. It would be the lesson he deserved for making me scrub toilets at 72. I picked up my broom. I turned toward the door, but then I stopped. If Jason was fired tomorrow, the game ended too soon. He would come home broken, yes, but he would blame the system. He would blame Halloway. He would play the victim. He wouldn't learn a thing. And worse, if he lost his job, my access to Vertex Dynamics would vanish. I would lose my vantage point. I needed him inside. I needed him to climb higher so the fall would be fatal. I sighed, a sound that echoed in the empty room. I put the broom down again. I walked over to the conference table and picked up a black dry erase marker. It felt familiar in my hand like an old weapon. I approached the board. My heart hammered against my ribs. The security camera in the corner blinked its slow red rhythm. I knew the cycle. It swept the room every 30 seconds. I waited for the lens to rotate toward the windows. Now. I moved fast. My hand didn't shake. I erased the faulty shipping variable. I replaced it with a dynamic algorithm I had developed in the 90s adjusted for modern inflation. I slashed through the amortization line and wrote in the correct depreciation schedule. It changed the bottom line. The profit wasn't a rocket ship anymore. It was a steady, sustainable climb. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a business plan. I capped the marker. I stepped back. The board looked different now. It looked professional. It looked like something Bernard King would have approved. I grabbed my broom and finished cleaning the room in record time. As I polished the glass table, I looked at the board one last time. I had just saved my son's career. I had just given him $1 million idea for free. And he would never know. He would look at it tomorrow morning, gloss over the changes, and assume his genius had just finally clicked into place. I left the room, locking the door behind me. The secret felt heavy in my chest, a cold stone of knowledge. I wasn't just cleaning the building. I was running it again from the shadows with a mop in one hand and a marker in the other. The next evening, the front door of Jason's house flew open with such force it banged against the wall. I was in the living room vacuuming the rug, another chore Brittany had added to my list, because the maid service is too expensive now that we are feeding 3. Jason stormed in. He wasn't walking. He was strutting. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and threw his arms wide, looking up at the ceiling as if he were a gladiator who had just conquered the Colosseum. "Boom! That is how it is done!" he shouted. Brittany ran in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "What happened? Did you do it?" Jason grabbed her by the waist and spun her around. He was laughing, a manic, high-pitched sound. "Did I do it, baby?" I crushed it. I walked into that boardroom and I owned it. Halloway was there. The VP of Finance was there. They were grilling everyone, tearing people apart. But when I presented Project Ares, silence. Absolute silence. He let go of her and paced the room, his energy frantic. Halloway looked at the numbers on the board. He looked at me, and he said, "King, this is the most solid risk assessment I have seen all quarter. The shipping variable is inspired." Inspired, he used the word inspired Brittany. Brittany squealed and clapped her hands. Oh my God. Jason, that is amazing. What does that mean? Did you get the promotion? Jason poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Not officially, but Holloway invited me to the executive retreat next month. That is the inner circle. It is happening, babe. We are going to be rich. Regional director is practically mine. I turned off the vacuum cleaner. The sudden silence drew their attention. Jason looked at me. For a second, I saw his smile falter. He looked at the old man in the oversized sweater holding a vacuum, and he felt a flicker of shame. But it was quickly replaced by arrogance. His success had justified his cruelty. He was the winner. I was the loser. The natural order was restored. He walked over to me, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He looked at me with a benevolence that was more insulting than his anger. You hear that, Dad? That is the sound of success. That is what happens when you have a brain for business. You wouldn't understand the complexities of what I pulled off today. The math involved. It is high-level stuff. Strategy. Vision. Things you were never good at. I gripped the handle of the vacuum. I remembered the red ink. I remembered the elementary errors I had erased. I remembered saving him from professional suicide. I am happy for you, Mr. King, I said, keeping my voice flat. He laughed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He fished around and pulled out a $20 bill. It was crumpled. He smoothed it out against his thigh, making a show of it. Here, he said, extending the bill toward me. I looked at the money. I looked at his face. What is this for? I asked. A tip, he said, grinning. I am in a good mood. Today was a payday for the King family. Go buy yourself some of that joint medicine you are always complaining about. Or maybe some new socks. The ones you have are full of holes. It is embarrassing. He waved the bill in front of my face like you would tempt a dog with a treat. Go on, take it. Consider it a bonus from the boss. I reached out and took the bill. The paper felt greasy. $20. He had just secured a potential salary increase of $50,000 a year using my work, and he was giving me $20 for joint medicine. The disrespect was physical. It felt like a slap. But I didn't flinch. I needed to play the part. I needed to feed his ego until it was so bloated it would burst. Thank you, sir, I said. I will put it to good use, Damasu. Good, Jason said, turning his back on me. Now finish the rug. We are ordering sushi to celebrate, and I don't want the noise of that machine ruining the vibe. He walked back to Brittany, and they started looking at menus on her phone, laughing about which expensive rolls they would order. They didn't ask if I was hungry. They didn't offer to buy me a roll. I turned the vacuum back on. The roar filled the room, drowning out their laughter. I looked at the $20 bill in my hand. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. I wouldn't spend it. I would keep it. I would frame it. It would be the first exhibit in the museum of his downfall. As I pushed the vacuum back and forth, watching my son toast to a victory he didn't earn, I felt a cold calm settle over me. He thought he was the architect of his own fortune. He didn't realize he was just a tenant in a house I built, and the eviction notice was already being drafted. He had taken the credit. He had taken the money. And now he had insulted the architect. The ghost in the machine wasn't just watching anymore. The ghost was starting to break the gears, and Jason King was standing right in the middle of the machinery. The basement was always cold, but that Thursday evening it felt like a tomb. I had just finished a 10-hour shift scrubbing the loading dock at Vertex Dynamics because a delivery truck had ruptured a hydraulic line. My back was a knot of pain, my hands smelled of degreaser, and all I wanted was to look at the one thing that still tethered me to my past life. I kept a small battered cigar box under my cot. It was hidden behind a stack of moldy cardboard boxes that Brittany insisted I keep because she might need them for eBay shipping one day. Inside that cigar box was a layer of velvet, and resting on that velvet was a watch. It wasn't just a watch. It was a vintage Patek Philippe Calatrava rose gold with a leather strap worn soft by decades of wear. My late wife Catherine had given it to me on the day I signed the incorporation papers for Vertex. On the back, she had engraved a simple message: "Time is yours to build." It was worth $50,000 on the collector's market, but to me it was priceless. It was the only tangible piece of Catherine I had left. I pulled the box out. It felt light. Too light. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden violent rhythm of panic. I opened the lid. The velvet was empty. I tore through the bedding. I checked the floor. I checked the pockets of my spare trousers. Nothing. It was gone. The box hadn't been moved, but the contents had been surgically removed. I didn't run upstairs. I walked. I walked with the slow, heavy tread of a man carrying a thunderstorm in his chest. I found Brittany in the kitchen. She was sitting at the island, a glass of Chardonnay in one hand, scrolling through her phone with the other. On the counter next to her sat a shopping bag. It was black with white lettering. Chanel. She didn't look up when I entered. She just took a sip of wine and sighed as if my presence disrupted the feng shui of the room. "Brittany," I said. My voice was low, rasping. "Where is my watch?" She paused, her finger hovering over her screen. She didn't turn around. "What are you talking about, Bernard? The watch?" "The gold watch that was in the cigar box under my bed." "It is gone." She finally turned. Her face was a mask of bored irritation, but her eyes were darting around the room, avoiding mine. "Oh, that old thing. We had a bit of a scare today, actually. I meant to tell you when you got in, but I forgot. You forgot I stepped closer. You forgot to tell me about a theft." She waved a hand dismissively. "It wasn't a big deal. I came home from Pilates and the back door was slightly ajar. I think someone slipped in. I checked the whole house, thank God, and nothing important was missing. The TV is still here, my jewelry is safe. They must have gone down to the basement and grabbed whatever junk they could find. I guess they took your watch. You really should have been more careful with your things, Bernard. Leaving valuables in an unlocked box in a basement. It is practically an invitation." I looked at her. I looked at the pristine lock on the back door. I looked at the alarm system panel on the wall, which was glowing green, armed and undisturbed. There was no break-in. There was no intruder. There was just a woman with a taste for luxury she couldn't afford, and a father-in-law she viewed as a resource to be strip-mined. I looked at the Chanel bag on the counter. The leather was quilted, shiny and new. A bag like that cost $5,000. My watch would have fetched a quick cash price at a pawn shop, just enough for a bag and a celebratory lunch. "You are telling me," I said, keeping my voice steady, "that a burglar broke into this house, ignored the 60-inch television in the living room, ignored the laptops on the dining table, walked past your jewelry box in the master bedroom, went down to a damp, unfinished basement, and stole one specific old watch from a cigar box under a cot." Brittany stood up, her face flushing pink. "Are you accusing me of something, Bernard? Because that sounds like an accusation. After everything Jason and I do for you, we put a roof over your head. We feed you. And this is the thanks I get. You lose your little trinket and you try to blame me. You are senile. That is what this is. You probably lost it weeks ago and forgot." Jason walked in from the garage then. He saw the tension in the room and immediately moved to Brittany's side, his arm going around her waist defensively. "What is going on? Why are you yelling at my wife? He is accusing me of stealing." "I saw Trietny," cried, her voice pitching up into a practiced whine. "He lost that old watch of his, and now he is saying, 'I took it.'" Jason looked at me with disgust. "Seriously, Dad, a burglar." Or maybe you sold it yourself to buy booze. I have smelled it on your breath. I hadn't had a drink in 20 years. But facts didn't matter in this house. Only narratives mattered. And the narrative was that I was a burden, a liar, and a fool. I looked at the Chanel bag. I looked at Brittany's wrist where a new gold bracelet glittered, probably bought with the change. That watch was the last thing Catherine gave me. It is just a watch, Dad, Jason snapped. It is a material object. Let it go, stop causing drama. We have had a long day. Brittany was terrified by the break-in, and you are making it about you. Go downstairs. Go to sleep. And don't bring this up again, or you will be looking for a new place to live. He turned to Brittany, kissing her temple. Don't worry, babe. He is just confused. Ignore him. Nice bag, by the way. Is it new, yeah? Brittany purred, smirking at me over Jason's shoulder. I treated myself. Retail therapy after the scare today. I stood there for a moment longer. I memorized the smirk. I memorized the way Jason dismissed his mother's memory as a material object. I memorized the lie. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked toward the basement door, but I didn't go down. I went into the powder room in the hallway and locked the door. I turned the faucet on full blast. The water rushed into the sink, creating a wall of white noise. I sat on the closed toilet lid and pulled the burner phone from my sock. My hands were trembling not from age but from a cold, lethal rage. This wasn't about money anymore. They had crossed a line. They had desecrated the memory of the only person who had ever truly loved me. I dialed the number. Cole answered on the first ring. Sir Cole. I said, my voice flat and hard as granite. Change of plans. The audit on Jason is secondary. I want you to open a file on Brittany. Brittany King, sirs. I want a forensic accounting of her life. I want to know every credit card she has opened, every debt she has hidden from my son, every store she frequents. I want to know if she has pawned anything in the last 24 hours. Check the shops on Michigan Avenue and the high-end pawnbrokers in the Loop. Look for a Patek Philippe Calatrava 1955 rose gold. Inscription. Time is yours to build. There was a pause on the line. They stole Mrs. King's watch. Yes, I heard the tapping of keys on a keyboard. Consider it done, Mr. King. We will find it. And the girl. Destroy her, Cole. I want to know everything. If she has so much as an unpaid parking ticket from 10 years ago, I want to know about it. If she has a secret bank account, find it. If she is selling fake designer goods online, document it. I want to know every sin she has ever committed. I want enough leverage to ensure that when I am done with her, she won't be able to get a credit card at a gas station. Understood, sir. We will have the report by morning. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my sock. I turned off the faucet. The silence returned. I looked at myself in the mirror. The sad, tired old janitor was gone. In his place was a CEO who had just decided to liquidate a failing asset. I unlocked the door and walked past the kitchen. Brittany and Jason were laughing, opening a bottle of wine. They didn't even look at me. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was broken. They had no idea that the timer had just started ticking, and this time I wasn't going to fix the numbers. I was going to let them crash. The cafeteria at Vertex Dynamics was a cavernous space of glass and steel designed to look like a futuristic hub of innovation, but at 12:15 on a Wednesday, it smelled like stress sweat and burnt espresso. The noise was a dull roar, the sound of 300 ambitious people trying to talk over each other, trying to network while chewing on overpriced paninis. I was pushing my yellow mop bucket near the recycling station, my head bowed, my eyes fixed on the gray linoleum tiles. My back was a knot of fire. I had spent the morning hauling heavy boxes of printer paper up 3 flights of stairs because the service elevator was broken again. My knees throbbed with every step, a constant dull ache that served as a reminder of my age and my station. I was invisible. I moved through the clusters of junior executives like a ghost. They stepped around me without breaking their conversations about market shares and quarterly targets. To them, I was just a blue jumpsuit. I was a mechanism that made the trash disappear. I wasn't a person. I certainly wasn't the man who had designed the very profit-sharing model they were currently arguing about. I maneuvered my cart toward the center of the room, where a large spill of soda was making the floor sticky. As I wrung out the mop, I heard a voice that made my stomach turn. It was a voice I had known since it babbled in a crib, but now it was sharp, loud, and cruel. It was Jason. He was sitting at a large round table in the center of the room, surrounded by his team. He wasn't eating. He was holding court. But the mood at the table wasn't celebratory. It was terrified. Jason's face was flushed a deep, angry red. His tie was loosened, and he was stabbing a finger into the chest of a young analyst named Sarah. "I told you to run the projections again, Sarah," Jason shouted, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the cafeteria. "These numbers are garbage, absolute garbage. Do you have any idea what Holloway will do to me if I present a sales forecast this week? He will skin me alive. And if I go down, you all go down with me." Sarah was trembling, clutching a tablet to her chest. "But Mr. King, the market data shows a downturn in the tech sector. The numbers are accurate. I can't just invent sales that don't exist. Don't give me excuses." Jason slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware jump. "Make them exist. Massage the data. Find the outliers. I don't care how you do it. Just get me a graph that points up, not down. I am under immense pressure here. The board is watching the Orion initiative. I need wins, Sarah. I need killers on my team, not data entry clerks who are afraid of a spreadsheet." I watched from 10 feet away. I gripped the mop handle until my knuckles turned white. He was panicked. The fixes I had made to his whiteboard last week had bought him some time, but they hadn't fixed the underlying problem. He didn't know how to lead. He didn't know how to navigate a market contraction. He only knew how to bully. He was drowning, and like a drowning man, he was climbing on top of everyone else to keep his head above water. He looked up then. His eyes wild and bloodshot from lack of sleep, and too much caffeine scanned the room for a target. Any target. Someone he could crush to reassert his dominance. Someone who couldn't fight back. His eyes landed on me. I saw the recognition flicker in his gaze, followed instantly by a wave of revulsion. I was the janitor. I was his father. I was the physical embodiment of everything he was ashamed of. And I was standing too close to his table. I was witnessing his loss of control. He stood up. He picked up his tray, which was still full of food he hadn't touched. He walked toward the trash cans, his path taking him directly past me. I stepped back, pulling the bucket with me to give him room. I lowered my gaze, following the rules. Be a ghost. Be invisible. But Jason didn't want a ghost today. He wanted a punching bag. As he passed me, he didn't swerve to avoid the bucket. He deviated from his path. He swung his leg out in a sharp, deliberate arc. It wasn't a stumble. It was a kick. The toe of his expensive Italian loafer connected with the side of my yellow mop bucket. The bucket wasn't empty. It was full of gray, chemically smelling water and floor grit. The bucket tipped. A wave of dirty slop crashed over the rim. It splashed across the floor, soaking the legs of my jumpsuit. But worse, it splashed onto Jason's shoes and the cuffs of his trousers. The sound of the bucket clattering against the tile silenced the cafeteria. The chatter stopped. 300 heads turned. Jason jumped back, dropping his tray. It shattered on the floor, adding to the mess. He looked down at his shoes. They were wet. He looked at me. A vein in his forehead was throbbing. "Look what you did," he screamed. The silence in the room was absolute now. Everyone was watching. "Look at this! You clumsy, senile idiot! Look at my shoes. These are Ferragamos. They cost more than you make in a month. I stood there, the cold water seeping into my socks. I knew he had kicked it. He knew he had kicked it. But to the room it looked like the clumsy old janitor had gotten in the way of the rising star executive. I am sorry, sir, I said, my voice low. I will clean it up. You are damn right you will clean it up, Jason spat. But you are not just cleaning the floor. He pointed a shaking finger at his wet shoe. Clean them. Now. I looked at him. I looked at the crowd. They were frozen, watching with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. No one moved to help. No one stood up to say, hey, that was an accident. And they were all afraid of him. Or maybe they were just relieved it wasn't them. What I asked, genuinely unsure if I had heard him correctly. You heard me, old man. Get down on your knees and clean my shoes. You got filth on me. You get it off, unless you want me to call HR right now and have you thrown out on the street for incompetence. Is that what you want? To lose this job. Because I can make that happen with one phone call. I looked into his eyes. There was no sun there. There was only a monster fed by insecurity and power. He was leveraging my poverty against my dignity. He knew I needed this job to eat. He knew I was terrified of being homeless. He was banking on my desperation. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut, heavier and harder than anything I had felt before. This was it. This was the point of no return. He had crossed the line from ungrateful son to tyrant. I looked up at the ceiling. High above the cafeteria, nestled in the acoustic tiles near the smoke detector, was a small black dome. Camera 04. I knew Camera 04. I had signed the purchase order for the security system upgrade 5 years ago. I knew that Alexander Halloway, the CEO, had a peculiar habit. Every day at noon, he sat in his office with a sandwich and watched the live feed of the cafeteria. He liked to see the pulse of the company, as he called it. He liked to see who sat with whom, who looked stressed, who looked happy. He called it his anthill time. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 12:18. Halloway was watching. He was seeing this. I looked back at Jason. If I refused, he would fire me. If he fired me, I lost my access. I lost the game. If I knelt, I kept my position. But more importantly, if I knelt, Halloway would see exactly what kind of man Jason King was. Halloway despised bullies. He despised arrogance. He valued respect above all else. I slowly lowered myself to the floor. My knees cracked loudly in the silence. The cold, dirty water soaked into the fabric of my pants immediately. I took the gray rag from the bucket. It was damp and smelled of cleaner. I reached out. I touched my son's shoe. Jason smirked. He looked around the room, making eye contact with his team, as if to say, "See, this is power. This is how you handle incompetence." He actually put his hands on his hips, posing like a conqueror standing over the vanquished. "Good," he said loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "Get in the crevices. I don't want any water spots. And hurry up. You are embarrassing yourself." I wiped the leather. I polished the toe. I kept my head down, playing the part of the broken old man. But inside I was screaming. I was screaming with a fury that would have burned the building down. I was cleaning the shoes of the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I was wiping the feet of the man who had thrown my legacy in the trash. I finished the left shoe. I moved to the right. Jason shifted his weight, almost kicking me in the face, making me flinch. He laughed. A cruel, short bark of a laugh. "Careful there, Pop. Don't fall over. You are shaking. Maybe you should retire." "Oh, wait. You can't afford to." I finished. I stood up, my legs trembling from the strain. I held the dirty rag in my hand. "Is that satisfactory, sir?" I asked. Jason inspected his shoes. He turned his foot left and right, catching the light. "It is adequate," he sneered. "Now clean up this mess on the floor. And stay out of my sight for the rest of the day. If I see you near my table again, you are done." He turned his back on me and sat down. He picked up a fork and started eating his salad as if nothing had happened. He didn't even look at the people around him who were staring at him in stunned silence. He thought he had won. He thought he had asserted his dominance. I mopped the floor. I cleaned up the spilled soda and the dirty water. I wrung out the mop. I put the wet floor sign down. I pushed my cart toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening. I knew that 45 floors up, Alexander Holloway was staring at his monitor. I knew he had put down his sandwich. I knew he was reaching for his phone. Jason had just committed professional suicide on live television, and he was too busy eating a Caesar salad to realize he was already dead. I walked into the hallway, away from the eyes of the crowd. I leaned against the cool wall, breathing heavily. My dignity felt bruised, battered, but my resolve was made of iron. Jason wanted a janitor, he got one, and I was going to clean up the trash. I went to the service elevator and pressed the button for the basement. I needed to change my uniform. It was wet. But as the doors closed, blotting out the light of the executive floors, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Checkmate, Jason. You just didn't know the king was on the board. The humiliation didn't end when I clocked out. It followed me home, riding shotgun in the back of my mind like a parasite. I walked through the front door at 7, my knees still aching from the hard tile of the cafeteria floor, my hands raw from the industrial cleaner I had used to scrub my son's shoes. I wanted a hot shower. I wanted silence. Instead, I walked into a frantic production. The house was ablaze with lights. Music was thumping from the living room speakers, a bass-heavy rhythm that rattled the picture frames I had hung 20 years ago. Brittany was running back and forth from the kitchen, arranging trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres. When she saw me, she didn't say hello. She just pointed at a garment bag hanging on the coat rack. "Put that on," she snapped. "Jason is hosting a pre-quarterly mixer for the team. We need someone to keep the glasses full, and the catering company wanted too much for a server." I unzipped the bag. Inside was a white waiter's jacket and a black bow tie. It looked like a costume from a bad movie. It was stiff, cheap polyester. I looked at her. "You want me to serve drinks to the people I just spent the day cleaning up after Jason walked in then?" He was wearing a velvet smoking jacket, looking every inch the lord of the manor. He saw me holding the white coat. "Don't give me that look," he said, pouring himself a preparatory scotch. "You live here rent-free. You eat my food. Tonight you earn your keep. Put on the jacket, Dad, and try to stand up straight." "You look like a question mark." I put on the jacket. It was tight across the shoulders. I tied the bow tie. I looked in the hallway mirror. I didn't see a father. I didn't see a CEO. I saw a servant. The guests arrived at 8. They were the same faces from the cafeteria. The sycophants, the climbers, the ones who laughed when Jason kicked my bucket. They filled my living room, drinking the wine I had paid for, eating the shrimp I had subsidized. I moved through the crowd with a silver tray, refilling glasses. I was invisible again. They reached for the wine without looking at my face. They continued their conversations about bonuses and stock options, never realizing the man pouring their Pinot Noir had written the algorithm that determined their stock value. Jason was holding court by the fireplace. He was telling a story, embellishing his role in the Orion project, claiming credit for ideas he couldn't even spell. His team laughed at all the right moments. Then a young man named Eric, the one who had snapped at me in the restroom earlier, noticed me. He frowned, squinting through his glasses. He nudged Jason. "Hey, Jason. That guy. The waiter. Isn't that the janitor from the office, the one who spilled the water on your shoes?" The room went quiet. The music seemed to fade into the background. All eyes turned to me. I stood there holding a bottle of Merlot freezing in the spotlight. Jason didn't miss a beat. He didn't blush. He didn't stutter. He laughed a loud, dismissive sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Oh, him, yeah. That is just old Bernie. He walked over to me, slinging an arm around my shoulder. But it wasn't a hug. It was a grip, a restraint. He is not really a waiter, Jason announced to the room, his voice dripping with performative charity. He is a distant uncle from my mother's side. Came up from the country a few months ago. Farm life was too hard for him. He tapped his temple with his finger. The elevator doesn't go all the way to the top anymore, if you know what I mean. He is a bit senile, confused. I gave him the janitor job as a favor just to keep him busy, and I let him stay here out of the goodness of my heart. Otherwise, he would be on the street. The guests made sympathetic noises. Oh, that is so noble of you, Jason. Taking in a stray relative. You are a saint. I looked at my son. He was smiling at them, basking in their adoration. He had just erased my identity. He had turned me into a charity case, a feeble-minded burden. He had stripped me of my fatherhood in front of strangers to boost his own ego. My hand started to shake. It wasn't age. It wasn't fear. It was a vibration of pure, unadulterated fury. The bottle of Merlot in my hand felt heavy. Is that right? I whispered. I am a charity case. Jason squeezed my shoulder hard, his fingernails digging into my clavicle. Just pour the wine, Bernie, he hissed through his teeth. I tried to pull away. The movement was jerky. The bottle clipped the edge of a crystal goblet on my tray. The glass tipped. It fell. It seemed to fall in slow motion. It hit the white Flocati rug that Brittany loved more than she loved her husband. It shattered. Red wine exploded outward like a gunshot wound, soaking into the pristine white fibers. The sound of breaking glass silenced the room instantly. Brittany gasped from the kitchen doorway. My rug, my imported rug. Jason stared at the stain. Then he looked at me. His face went from charming host to monster in a nanosecond. The vein in his forehead bulged. You clumsy old fool, he shouted. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He swung his hand. The slap was loud. It was a wet, cracking sound that seemed to suck the air out of the room. His palm connected with my cheekbone with the full force of his body weight. My head snapped to the side. I stumbled back, dropping the bottle. It landed with a thud on the carpet, glugging wine onto the floor like a severed artery. My cheek burned. My ear rang. I touched my face. My fingers came away trembling. I looked at the guests. They were looking away, studying their shoes, swirling their drinks. They were uncomfortable, but no one said a word. No one stepped forward. No one told Jason he was out of line. Jason stood over me, his chest heaving. Look what you did, he screamed, pointing at the rug. That is a $5,000 rug. You are useless. You can't clean a toilet and you can't pour a drink. Get out of my sight. Go to the basement. And don't come out until you can pay for this. He turned his back on me. Sorry, everyone, he said, his voice instantly switching back to the smooth, executive tone. It is hard to find good help, even when they are family. Let's move to the patio. Fresh air. He ushered them out the sliding glass doors. Brittany stormed past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder. Clean this up, Bernard. If that stain sets, you are sleeping in the garage. I stood alone in the living room. The party moved outside. Laughter floated in through the open door. I touched my cheek again. It was hot. I looked at the wine stain. It looked like blood. That slap. That single violent act. It wasn't just physical pain. It was a seal breaking. It was the final signature on a contract of war. I didn't clean the rug. I stepped over the puddle of wine. I walked to the hallway. I took off the white jacket and let it drop to the floor. I undid the bow tie and draped it over the family portrait hanging in the hall, the one of Jason and Brittany smiling with me cropped out of the frame. I walked to the basement door. I didn't go down to sleep. I went down to work. I packed my small suitcase, my toothbrush, a change of clothes, the few photos of Catherine I had managed to hide from Brittany. I put on my heavy coat. I checked my pocket for my burner phone. I sat on the edge of the cot and dialed. Cole. Yes, sir. Execute Omega. Now. Sir, tonight. Send the car. I want Alexander Halloway in my office at 9 a.m. sharp. And Cole. Yes, Mr. King. Draft the eviction notice. And call the police. Tell them to have a unit on standby at Vertex Dynamics tomorrow morning. We are going to have a disturbance. I hung up. I could still hear this party outside. Jason was making a toast. To family, he said. And to the future. I walked out the back door into the alley. A black town car was already turning the corner, its headlights cutting through the darkness. To the future, Jason, I whispered. I got into the car. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't cry. The father who had entered that house 3 months ago was dead. The man riding in the back of the limousine was the chairman of the board, and he had a shareholders' meeting to attend. The basement was quiet now. The heavy thump of the bass from the speakers upstairs had finally faded, replaced by the creaking of floorboards, as the last guests stumbled out to their Ubers. I sat on the edge of my cot, the thin mattress sagging under my weight. My cheeks still throbbed with a dull rhythmic heat where my son had struck me. I reached up and touched the skin. It felt tight, foreign. It was the physical manifestation of a bond severing. I didn't cry. Tears are for grief, and I was done grieving the son I thought I had. What I felt now was a cold clarity, sharp and absolute like the edge of a diamond. The time for observation was over. The experiment had run its course, and the results were conclusive. The subject, my son, was irredeemable. I stood up and pulled my small battered suitcase from under the cot. It was the same bag I had arrived with 3 months ago, thinking I was embarking on a journey of reconciliation. I had thought living with him, seeing his struggles, helping him from the shadows would bring us closer. Instead, it had only given me a front-row seat to his moral decay. I opened the suitcase on the concrete floor. I packed methodically. I folded my 2 flannel shirts. I packed my 1 pair of dress slacks, the ones I had worn to my wife's funeral. I packed the framed photograph of Catherine that I had kept hidden behind a loose brick in the wall, terrified that Brittany would sell the frame for scrap silver. I looked at Catherine's face in the photo. She was smiling, unaware that the empire we built would one day become the weapon used to destroy our son's ego. I left the blue polyester Vertex jumpsuit hanging on a rusty nail. I wouldn't need it where I was going. I left the mop bucket in the corner. I left the half-eaten loaf of bread on the nightstand. I wanted them to come down here tomorrow and find the ghost of the man they had abused. I wanted them to see the empty space where their victim used to be. I sat back down on the cot. I didn't sleep. Sleep was impossible. My mind was racing, calculating the trajectory of the next 12 hours. I closed my eyes and visualized the boardroom at Vertex Dynamics. I visualized the oak table, the leather chairs, the view of the lake. I visualized Jason walking in expecting a promotion and finding an executioner. At 3 a.m, the house was completely silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs and the occasional settling groan of the foundation. I knew that foundation. I knew the contractor who poured it. I knew the bank that held the note. Jason thought he was the master of this house, but he was just a squatter living on borrowed time. I reached into my sock and pulled out the burner phone. The battery was at 12%. It was enough. I opened the secure email client. My fingers hovered over the keypad. This was it. The point of no return. Once I hit send, the machinery of the Omega Protocol would grind into gear. Assets would be frozen. Security teams would be mobilized. Lawyers would be woken up in their penthouse apartments. I typed the address. A. Halloway at vertexdynamics.corp. Subject, Omega. I typed the message slowly, savoring every letter. Alex, it is time. The audit is complete. The results are unacceptable. I will be at the tower tomorrow at 0900 hours. Do not announce my arrival. I want the element of surprise. Bring the full termination file for Jason King. Include the HR reports on the cafeteria incident. Also have legal draft the eviction notice for the property at 42 Elm Street. Immediate effect. Prepare the board. The chairman is returning. Bernard. I pressed send. The screen showed a small spinning circle, then a check mark. Sent. I put the phone down on the mattress. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The burden of being the helpless father was gone. I was Bernard King again. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, listening to my son snore through the floorboards above me. It was a greedy, heavy sound. He was sleeping the sleep of the arrogant confident that tomorrow would bring him more power, more money, more validation. He was dreaming of the corner office. He had no idea that the man in the basement had just canceled his future. I thought about the $20 he had thrown at me. I took the bill out of my pocket and smoothed it against my knee. I placed it on the pillow of the cot. A tip for the cleaning lady, I thought. Or maybe a severance package. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the small basement window, I stood up. I put on my heavy wool coat and my fedora. I picked up my suitcase. I walked up the basement stairs for the last time. The door to the kitchen was unlocked. I stepped into the house. It smelled of stale wine and expensive perfume. The white Flocati rug in the living room was still stained red, a jagged scar across the floor. Jason hadn't cleaned it. He had left it for me. I walked past the rug. I didn't look at the family photos on the mantel. I didn't look at the expensive electronics. I walked to the front door. I opened it and stepped out into the cool morning air. The street was quiet. A black town car was idling at the curb. Its windows tinted its engine a soft purr. The driver, a man named Stone who had been my security chief for 20 years, stepped out and opened the rear door. "Good morning," Mr. King. Stone said, his voice low and respectful. "Good morning, Stone," I replied. He took my suitcase and placed it in the trunk. I slid into the back seat. The leather was soft-smelling of cedar and polish. It was a different world from the passenger seat of Jason's Audi. "Where to, sir?" Stone asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Vertex Tower," I said. And Stone, "Yes, sir, take the long way. I want to drive past the bank. I want to see the doors open." Stone nodded. Understood. The car pulled away from the curb. I didn't look back at the house. I looked forward toward the city skyline rising in the distance. The sun was just starting to hit the glass towers, turning them into pillars of fire. It was a beautiful day for a reckoning. The morning sun hit the glass facade of Vertex Dynamics with a blinding intensity, turning the lobby into a greenhouse of ambition and anxiety. It was 8:45. The air inside the building was different today. It didn't smell like floor wax and stale coffee. It smelled of expensive cologne, dry cleaning, and fear. I stood near the security desk, gripping the handle of my mop bucket. I had arrived an hour earlier, entering through the back, and I had put on the blue polyester jumpsuit for the very last time. It felt heavy on my shoulders, heavier than usual, perhaps because I knew what lay beneath it. I wasn't just wearing a uniform today. I was wearing a costume for the final act of a tragedy I had written myself. The lobby was packed. Usually at this hour, people were rushing to the elevators, heads down, coffees clutched like lifelines. Today, no one was moving. The entire management team of the Chicago branch had assembled in a phalanx near the revolving doors. They stood in two lines like a royal guard, checking their watches, smoothing their ties, picking lint off each other's shoulders. At the head of the formation stood my son. Jason looked impeccable. He was wearing a navy blue suit that I knew he had put on a credit card. He couldn't pay off. His hair was gelled to perfection. His shoes, the ones I had cleaned on my knees yesterday, gleamed under the recessed lighting. He was vibrating with energy. He wasn't just standing there. He was projecting. He was the alpha dog, the heir apparent, the man who had supposedly saved the Orion Initiative. I watched him from the shadows of a potted ficus plant. He was talking to the branch manager, a nervous man named Peterson, who was sweating through his shirt. Jason was laughing, clapping Peterson on the shoulder, acting as if he were already the man's boss. He checked his reflection in the glass door every 30 seconds. He was ready for his coronation. The rumor had spread like wildfire yesterday afternoon. Alexander Holloway was coming. The CEO never visited the branches unless heads were going to roll or stars were going to be born. Jason had convinced himself and everyone around him that Holloway was coming to personally pin a medal on his chest. I pushed my cart forward. The wheels squeaked a sharp, dissonant note in the hushed symphony of the lobby. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I saw the look of irritation ripple through the crowd. Who was this old man interrupting the tableau, who let the help out of the basement during the royal visit I kept pushing? I moved out of the shadow of the plant and into the open space of the atrium. I was 20 feet away from Jason. He saw me. His smile vanished as if I had flipped a switch. His eyes went wide, then narrowed into slits of pure, concentrated hatred. He looked at the revolving doors, terrified that Holloway would walk in at that exact second and see us in the same frame. He looked back at me. He broke rank. He marched toward me, his steps fast and aggressive. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the loose fabric of my jumpsuit, pulling me toward a maintenance closet hidden behind a pillar. "What are you doing?" He hissed, his voice a low, strangled whisper. "Are you insane? Do you have a death wish?" I looked at him calmly. "I am mopping the floor, Mr. King." "It is dusty." "Dusty," he spat the word out. "The CEO of the company is going to be walking through those doors in 5 minutes. Alexander Holloway. Do you know who that is? Of course you don't. He is a god in this industry. And I am about to shake his hand. I am about to be promoted. And you are standing here like a stain on the carpet." He shoved me toward the closet door. "Get in there. Now." I resisted, planting my feet. "I need to finish this section," I said. Jason's face turned a violent shade of purple. He looked over his shoulder. The other executives were watching, whispering. He was losing control of the narrative. "Listen to me, you senile old fool," he snarled, leaning in so close I could smell the mints he had been chewing to mask the smell of his fear. "You are ruining the most important moment of my life. I don't want Holloway to see you. I don't want him to smell you. You look like a bum. You smell like bleach and failure. If he sees me standing next to a piece of trash like you, it reflects on me." He opened the closet door. It was dark inside, filled with buckets and brooms. "Get inside," he ordered. "Stay there. Don't make a sound. Don't breathe. If you come out before I tell you, I swear to God, I will throw you out on the street tonight. I will burn your clothes. I will leave you with nothing. Do you understand me? Nothing." I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing his image. He didn't care if I was hurt. He didn't care if I was humiliated. He only cared that I was an aesthetic problem that needed to be hidden away. I let him push me. I stumbled slightly into the threshold of the closet. "Just stay there," he hissed, "and pray I am in a good mood when I come back to let you out." He slammed the door. The latch clicked. I stood in the dark. The smell of floor wax was overpowering. I could hear his footsteps retreating, the click of his heels on the marble as he ran back to his position at the head of the line. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I reached into the pocket of my jumpsuit and pulled out the handle of the door. It didn't lock from the outside. He hadn't checked. He was too sloppy. I waited. I counted the seconds in the dark. 1, 2, 3. Outside, a sudden hush fell over the lobby. It was a silence so profound, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the building. Then the sound of a heavy door revolving. I pushed the closet door open just a crack. A black limousine had pulled up to the curb, visible through the glass walls. It wasn't just a car. It was a fortress on wheels. A driver opened the rear door. Alexander Holloway stepped out. He looked exactly as I remembered him, perhaps a little grayer at the temples, but just as sharp. He buttoned his jacket. He walked through the revolving doors. The atmosphere in the lobby shattered, a collective intake of breath. Jason straightened his tie one last time. He put on his winning smile. He took a step forward, his hand extended ready to greet the man he thought was his savior. "Welcome to the Chicago branch, Mr. Holloway," Jason said, his voice smooth, practiced. "I am Jason King. We have been expecting you. It is an honor to." Holloway didn't stop. He didn't take Jason's hand. He didn't even look at him. He walked right past Jason as if he were a statue. He walked past the branch manager. He walked past the vice presidents. He walked straight toward the closet. I pushed the door open fully. I stepped out holding my mop. Jason turned around, his face a mask of confusion and horror. He opened his mouth to shout at me, to order me back into the dark. But Holloway was faster. He stopped 3 feet in front of me. The entire lobby watched in stunned silence. The great Alexander Holloway, the shark of Wall Street. The man who terrified grown men with a glance stood before the old janitor, and then he bowed. It wasn't a nod. It was a deep, respectful bow. "Good morning, Sir Holloway," said, his voice ringing clear in the silent cavern of the lobby. I looked at Holloway. I looked at Jason. "Good morning, Alex," I said. "You are late." Jason let out a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. "S," Sir Jason stammered, stepping forward, his hands trembling. "Mr. Holloway, I think there is a mistake. This is just the cleaning staff. He is confused. He shouldn't be speaking to you." Holloway turned slowly. He looked at Jason. He looked at him with a cold curiosity, like a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "Cleaning staff," Holloway repeated. "Yes," Jason said, a desperate, nervous laugh bubbling up from his throat. "He is nobody. Just a senile old man I hired out of pity. I told him to hide in the closet so he wouldn't bother you." Holloway's expression hardened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You told him to hide?" Holloway asked softly. Jason nodded, thinking he was finding common ground. "Exactly. I didn't want him to embarrass the company." Holloway turned back to me. He reached out and gently took the mop from my hand. He leaned it against the wall. Then he reached for the zipper of my blue jumpsuit. "May I?" Holloway asked. I nodded. Holloway pulled the zipper down. The blue polyester fell away, revealing the bespoke charcoal gray suit I was wearing underneath. It was a suit cut on Savile Row. I adjusted my silk tie. I smoothed my lapels. I wasn't the janitor anymore. Holloway took a step back. "Jason," he said, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You seem to be under a significant misapprehension. This man is not the cleaning staff. This man is the chairman of the board. He is the founder of Vertex Dynamics, and he is the man who owns 51% of the stock that pays your salary." Jason froze. His face went white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at me. He looked at the suit. He looked at the eyes he had seen across the dinner table for 30 years, the eyes he had dismissed as weak and old. "Dad," he whispered. I stepped forward. I didn't smile. "Hello, Mr. King," I said. "I believe we have a meeting." The lobby of Vertex Dynamics had become a tableau of frozen ambition. The air conditioning hummed a low mechanical drone that seemed to be the only thing daring to move in the presence of Alexander Halloway. I stood there, the blue jumpsuit pooled around my ankles, like a shed skin revealing the charcoal wool of my bespoke suit. I adjusted my cuffs, feeling the familiar weight of expensive cufflinks against my wrists. It was a sensation I had not felt in years, a tactile reminder of who I used to be and who I was about to become again. Jason stood 10 feet away. His hand was still half extended, frozen, in a greeting that would never be reciprocated. He looked like a man who had stepped off a curb and found himself falling into a canyon. His eyes darted from Halloway's face to mine, his brain misfiring as it tried to reconcile two impossible realities. In his mind, I was the senile old man who slept in his basement and owed him $20. In front of his eyes, I was the man the most powerful CEO in Chicago was treating with deference. Halloway did not look at Jason. He did not look at the line of vice presidents who were sweating through their starch-stiffened shirts. He did not acknowledge the branch manager Peterson, who looked as if he might faint. Halloway only had eyes for me. He took a step back, giving me space, creating a physical sphere of respect around us that no one else dared to enter. He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture rigid, his expression grave. "Mr. King Halloway," said his voice carrying to the furthest corners of the silent atrium. "The board of directors has assembled in the main conference room. We have delayed the quarterly vote until your arrival. The entire executive committee is present as per your instructions regarding the Omega Protocol. We are awaiting your directive concerning the immediate restructuring of the personnel in this branch." The word restructuring hit the room like a physical blow. In the corporate world, that word meant blood. It meant layoffs. It meant the end of careers. The junior executives exchanged terrified glances. They knew that when Alexander Halloway talked about restructuring, he wasn't talking about moving desks. He was talking about executions. But Jason could not hear the threat. He could only hear the absurdity. His ego, bloated by weeks of stolen credit and false victories, simply could not accept the data his senses were providing. He took a stumbling step forward, breaking the invisible barrier Halloway had established. He laughed. It was a wet, nervous sound, bubbling up from a throat constricted by panic. Sir Jason said, his voice pitching high and cracking. "Mr. Halloway, I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding here. This is a prank, right? Did the guys in marketing put you up to this?" Jason gestured wildly at me, his hand shaking. "This man, he is not a board member. He is my father. He is a charity case. I hired him to clean the toilets because he couldn't pay his heating bill. He is confused, sir. He has dementia. He probably stole that suit from the Lost and Found. You shouldn't be bowing to him. You should be calling security." Halloway turned his head slowly. He looked at Jason. It was the look a lion gives a hyena that has wandered too close to the kill. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, predatory dismissal. "Mr. King," Halloway said to me, ignoring Jason completely. "Shall I have security remove this obstacle so we can proceed to the elevators?" I raised a hand. "No, Alex. Let him speak." "I want to hear it." Jason looked at me. He saw the suit. He saw the way I stood, not hunched over a mop, but upright, commanding the space. But he couldn't let go of the narrative he had built. He couldn't let go of the power he thought he held over me. "Dad, stop it!" Jason hissed, moving closer, his face twisted into a mask of desperate aggression. "Take that suit off. You look ridiculous. You are embarrassing me in front of the CEO. Tell him who you are. Tell him you are the janitor. Tell him you are nobody." I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had kicked my mop bucket. I looked at the man who had slapped my face. I looked at the man who had thrown $20 at me as if I were a beggar. I reached up and took off the dirty baseball cap I had been wearing to hide my eyes for 3 months. I dropped it on the floor. It landed next to Jason's polished shoes. I ran a hand through my gray hair, smoothing it back. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was looking down at him. "Nobody?" I asked softly. Jason flinched. He stepped back. He looked around the lobby, looking for allies, looking for someone to help him reassert his reality. But the lobby had turned against him. The security guards were standing at attention. The receptionists were staring. The vice presidents were looking at their shoes. They knew. They had figured it out. They realized that the predator in the room wasn't Holloway. It was me. "You called me a janitor, Jason," I said, my voice rising, filling the cavernous space. "You made me scrub the floors of this building. You made me clean your shoes on my knees. You told your friends I was a senile old fool who lived off your charity." I took another step. Jason retreated, bumping into a potted plant. "You thought you were climbing a ladder," I continued. "You thought you were a genius because the numbers on your whiteboard magically fixed themselves overnight. You thought you were a leader because you could scream at your subordinates. You thought you were powerful because you could abuse an old man who had nowhere else to go." I stopped. I spread my arms, encompassing the building, the glass, the steel, the people. "You didn't know, did you? You didn't know that I poured the foundation of this tower. You didn't know that I wrote the code that runs your servers. You didn't know that I signed the checks that built your department." Jason was shaking now. His face was the color of ash. "Dad, what are you saying I am saying?" I replied, my voice hard as iron, that you are not speaking to the janitor. You are not speaking to your charity case. You are speaking to the majority shareholder of Vertex Dynamics. I pointed a finger at his chest. "I own 51% of the chair you sit in, Jason. I own 51% of the desk you put your feet on. I own 51% of the air you are breathing right now. And I have seen enough." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Jason looked at Holloway, begging for a denial, begging for the CEO to laugh and say it was all a joke. Holloway looked at Jason. He checked his watch. "Mr. King is correct," Holloway said dryly. "He retains controlling interest in the company. I serve at his pleasure. And apparently you do not." Jason's knees buckled. He actually stumbled, grabbing the edge of the security desk to hold himself up. The reality crashed down on him like a collapsing building. The house, the job, the money, the arrogance. It all evaporated in a single second. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears of terror. "Dad," he whispered, "please." I didn't know. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had loved, the son I had saved, the son I had lost. "I know you didn't," I said, "and that is why you are fired." I turned to Holloway. "Alex, let's go. The board is waiting. And have someone clean up this mess in the lobby. It smells like desperation." I walked toward the elevators. Holloway fell into step beside me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I didn't look back at my son. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what he looked like. He looked like a man who had just realized that the floor he was standing on was a trapdoor and I had just pulled the lever. The elevator ride to the 45th floor was silent. It was the kind of silence that usually accompanies a funeral procession. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the inner sanctum of Vertex Dynamics, the executive suite. I walked out first. My stride was long and purposeful. I could feel the ghost of the janitor fading with every step, replaced by the muscle memory of the man who had built this floor plan with a pencil and a dream 3 decades ago. Alexander Holloway walked beside me, a silent sentinel. Behind us, Jason dragged his feet. I could hear his breathing. It was shallow, ragged, the sound of a man trying to inhale through a straw. He was walking to his own execution, and he knew it. We entered the CEO's office. It was a corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The furniture was modern, sleek leather and chrome, but the desk was the same heavy oak slab I had bought at an auction in 1995. I walked behind it. I ran my hand along the grain of the wood. It felt cool, solid. It felt like home. I sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It groaned softly, accepting my weight. I rested my elbows on the desk and steepled my fingers. I looked at Holloway. The file, Alex. Holloway placed a thick manila folder in front of me. He stood to my right, arms crossed, looking at Jason with a mixture of pity and disgust. Jason stood in front of the desk. He looked small. The arrogance that had defined him for the last 3 months had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child in an ill-fitting suit. He was shaking. His hands were gripping the back of the guest chair as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "Dad," Jason started, his voice cracking. "Please. This is insanity. We can talk about this." I was stressed. The pressure of the project. You have to understand. I didn't answer. I simply opened the folder. I pulled out a tablet and placed it on the desk facing him. I tapped the screen. The video began to play. It was high-definition footage from cameras 04 in the cafeteria. It showed everything. The crowded room, the yellow mop bucket, the old man in the blue jumpsuit trying to make way. And then it showed Jason. It showed the deliberate deviation in his path. It showed the kick. It showed the water splashing. It showed him standing over me, forcing me to my knees, making me shine his shoes, while 300 people watched. Jason watched the screen. He went pale. He couldn't look away. In the harsh light of the office, stripped of his ego, the act looked exactly like what it was. Cruel, sadistic, weak. I paused the video on the frame where I was on my knees holding his shoe. "Is this stress, Jason?" I asked softly. "Is this how a leader handles pressure? By kicking a man who makes minimum wage, by humiliating a subordinate to make yourself feel tall?" Jason swallowed hard. I didn't know it was you. If I had known..." "That makes it worse," I cut him off. My voice was like a whip. "If you had known it was me, you would have treated me with respect because you wanted my money. But because you thought I was a nobody, you treated me like dirt. That is the true measure of a man, Jason. How he treats the people who can do absolutely nothing for him. And you failed. You failed in a way that makes you unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a division of this company." I slid the tablet aside and pulled out a stack of papers. They were stapled together, highlighted in yellow. "But cruelty is not your only sin, is it?" I asked. Jason looked at the papers. He squinted. Then his eyes widened. "I spent 3 months cleaning this building, Jason. Do you know what people throw away? They throw away everything. They throw away invoices. They throw away drafts of budgets. They throw away evidence." I picked up the top sheet. "You claimed you saved the department $50,000 in vendor costs last quarter. But when I cross-referenced the trash from your office with the accounting logs, I found something interesting. You didn't negotiate lower prices. You switched to a cheaper, inferior supplier for the server coolants, a supplier owned by your college roommate. And the difference in price, it didn't go back to the company. It went into a shell account in the Cayman Islands." Jason gasped. That is a lie. That is a consulting fee." "It is embezzlement, Jason," I said. "It is fraud. I found the emails printed out in your recycling bin. You were so arrogant you didn't even shred them. You thought no one looked at the janitor's cart. You thought the trash just disappeared. Well, I was the trash man, and I read every word. I threw the papers at him. They fluttered through the air and landed at his feet. You stole from my company. You stole from the man who gave you a job. You jeopardized the infrastructure of this firm to buy what? A new watch. A lease on a car you can't drive. Jason was crying now. Fat, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. Dad, I am sorry. I needed the money. Brittany, she spends so much. I was drowning. I just wanted to get ahead. I reached into the folder for the final document. This was the one that would hurt the most. It was a deed. A property deed for a house at 42 Elm Street. You wanted to get ahead, I repeated. You wanted to be the big man. You wanted to be the provider. You told me you bought that house. You told me you were the master of your domain. I held up the deed. You don't own that house, Jason. You never did. When you came to me 5 years ago with your gambling debts, I didn't just pay them off. I set up a blind trust. The trust bought the house. The trust pays the mortgage. You pay a monthly fee that you think is a mortgage payment, but it is really just rent paid to a shell corporation controlled by me. Jason looked at the deed. He looked at me. His reality was fracturing. You own my house, I own the roof over your head, I said. I own the walls you hang your pictures on. I own the basement where you made me sleep on a cot next to the furnace. I stood up. I leaned over the desk. The time for lessons was over. This was the time for judgment. 3 months ago, you sat at your kitchen table and told me I was a burden. You told me you didn't want to feed an extra mouth. You told me I had to earn my keep or get out. I walked around the desk. I stood toe-to-toe with him. He smelled of sweat and fear. You were right, Jason. In this economy, you have to be useful. You have to contribute. And right now, you are a liability. You are a thief. You are a bully. And you are a failure. I picked up the file from the desk and shoved it into his chest. He grabbed it reflexively. I don't want to feed an extra mouth either, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Especially a mouth that bites the hand that feeds it. I turned to Holloway. General Counsel is waiting in the hallway. Yes, sir, Holloway replied. Good. I looked back at my son. You are fired, Jason. Effective immediately. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal effects. You have 10 minutes. Do not touch a computer. Do not touch a file. If you try to steal so much as a stapler, I will have you arrested. Jason sobbed. Dad, please. What about the house? Where will we go? I checked my watch. The same Patek Philippe he had allowed his wife to steal. It is 9:15. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the property at 42 Elm Street. The locks will be changed tomorrow at 9:15. If your things are still inside, they will be donated to charity. I suggest you call Brittany. Tell her to stop shopping and start packing. Dad, you can't do this. I am your son. I looked at him. I looked for the boy I used to know, but he was gone, buried under layers of greed and entitlement. I am not your dad right now, Jason. I am the chairman, and this is a business decision. I turned my back on him. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. It was vast and cold and indifferent. Get him out of my office, Alex. I heard Holloway step forward. I heard the soft grip of a hand on a shoulder. I heard Jason's shuffling footsteps as he was led away. I heard the heavy door close. I was alone. I took a deep breath. The air in the office was clean. It was purified. I sat back down in my chair. I picked up the phone. Cole. Yes, sir. Phase 1 is complete. Initiate Phase 2. Send the police to the house. It is time to have a conversation with Brittany about a stolen watch. I hung up. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt efficient. I had cleaned the toilet. Now it was time to take out the trash. The rain had started to fall in sheets by the time my town car pulled up to the curb across the street from 42 Elm Street. I rolled down the window just an inch. I wanted to hear the thunder, but not from the sky. The thunder was about to come from the front door. I watched as 2 squad cars pulled into the driveway, their lights cutting through the gloom, flashing blue and red against the siding of the house I owned. Jason hadn't arrived yet. He was still making his way back from the city, stripped of his dignity and his job. But Brittany was home. She was probably counting the money from the pawn shop, planning her next trip to the mall. The officers walked up the path. They didn't knock politely. They hammered on the door. I saw the curtain twitch. A moment later, Brittany opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand, looking annoyed at the intrusion. She thought it was a delivery driver or a neighbor complaining about the noise from last night. I couldn't hear the initial words, but I saw her body language change instantly. She dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the porch. She tried to step back to close the door, but the lead officer blocked it with his boot. He wasn't there for a chat. He stepped inside, grabbed her wrist, and spun her around. The charge was specific: trafficking in stolen goods, grand larceny. When Brittany had pawned my Patek Philippe yesterday for a fraction of its value, she hadn't realized 2 things. First, that watch was insured for $50,000 and registered on an international database of stolen antiquities. Second, my lawyer Cole had flagged the serial number as stolen the moment she left the house with it. When the pawnbroker ran the number this morning, it triggered a silent alarm at the precinct. To the law, Brittany wasn't just a greedy daughter-in-law selling an old man's junk. She was a fence-moving, high-value stolen property. They dragged her out onto the porch. She was screaming now, a shrill, piercing sound that drew neighbors to their windows. She was fighting, kicking her silk robe flapping in the wind. I didn't take it. It was just old junk. He gave it to me. He is senile. The officer didn't care. He pressed her against the wall of the house and cuffed her hands behind her back. He read her rights in the rain. Just then, a taxi screeched to a halt in front of the driveway. Jason stumbled out. He was soaked, his suit ruined his face, a mask of exhaustion. He saw the police lights. He saw his wife in handcuffs. He ran toward the house, slipping on the wet grass. "What is going on?" Jason yelled. "Get your hands off her." "Who called you?" The officer turned to Jason. He held up an evidence bag. Inside was the watch. The rose gold glinted under the porch light. "We recovered this from a shop on State Street," the officer said. "Your wife signed the ticket. The owner of the watch, Mr. Bernard King, filed a report this morning. This is a felony, sir. Step back or you will be joining her for obstruction." Jason froze. He looked at the watch. He looked at Brittany. Brittany saw him. And in that moment, the illusion of their marriage evaporated. She didn't see a husband. She saw a failure. She saw the man who had promised her the world and delivered a jail cell. "Jason," she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You told me he was a nobody. You told me he was garbage. You said he wouldn't notice." "Brittany, shut up," Jason pleaded, looking at the neighbors, who were now standing on their porches. "No, I won't shut up," she screamed, thrashing against the officer's grip. "This is your fault, you and your stupid promotion. You said we owned this house. You said we were rich. You are a liar, Jason. You are a loser. I sold the watch because you couldn't pay the credit card bills. You did this to me." She spat at him. It landed on his ruined suit. The officers shoved her into the back of the squad car. She kicked the window, screaming obscenities that echoed down the quiet suburban street. She blamed him for the theft. She blamed him for the poverty. She blamed him for her own greed. Jason stood alone in the driveway as the police car pulled away, lights flashing. He looked at the empty porch. He looked at the shattered wine glass. He looked at the house that he had been evicted from less than an hour ago. I watched it all from the safety of my car. I watched the woman who had thrown my notebook in the trash get hauled away like a common criminal. I watched the son who had kicked my mop bucket stand in the rain, destroyed by the very partner he had chosen. It was a clean sweep. The house was empty. The job was gone. The marriage was over. I tapped the partition glass. "Drive Stone," I said. But as the car began to move, Jason turned. He saw the black limousine. He saw my silhouette in the back window. Recognition dawned on his face, followed by a look of utter, crushing despair. He started to run toward the car. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, wait!" He chased the car down the street, his expensive shoes slapping against the wet pavement. He was waving his arms, begging, pleading. But the car was faster. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see him fall to his knees in the middle of the road. I knew he was there. And I knew that for the first time in his life he was truly on his own. The rain washed away the tire tracks. It washed away the wine on the porch. But it would never wash away the stain of what they had done. And now they would have a lifetime to think about the cost of a watch and the price of a father's love. The black limousine glided forward, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. I sat in the back, the warmth of the climate control wrapping around me, contrasting sharply with the freezing rain battering the world outside. I told myself to look ahead. I told myself to focus on the skyline, on the board meeting, on the future of Vertex Dynamics. But the sound of a hand slamming against the trunk of the car shattered my resolve. It was a desperate, hollow thud. Then another, and another. I turned my head. Through the rain-streaked rear window I saw him. Jason was running. He had lost one of his shoes in the mud. His suit jacket was soaked through, clinging to his frame like a second skin. His hair was plastered to his skull. He wasn't running like an athlete. He was running like a man escaping a fire, arms flailing, mouth open in a silent scream. He pulled alongside the rear passenger door. He hammered his fist against the tinted glass. I could see his mouth moving, forming the word "Dad" over and over again. His face was a mask of terror. It was the face of a child who realizes the lights have gone out and no one is coming to turn them back on. "Stop the car, Stone," I said quietly. The car came to a smooth halt. Jason collided with the door, grabbing the handle with both hands, yanking on it. It was locked. He pressed his face against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. He looked like a ghost trying to break into the land of the living. I pressed the button. The window hummed and lowered. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of ozone, wet asphalt, and my son's fear. Jason gripped the top of the window frame, his knuckles white. Water dripped from his nose and chin, mixing with the tears that were flowing freely now. "Dad!" he gasped, choking on the air. "Dad, let me in. Please. It is freezing. She is gone. The police took her. I am all alone out here. I have nowhere to go. You took the house, you took the job, you won okay. You proved your point. Now open the door." He tried to reach inside to unlock the door himself. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked at his hand. The same hand that had slapped my face. The same hand that had thrown a crumpled $20 bill at me. Jason saw my expression and pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. He started bargaining. The desperation made his voice high and thin. "I can fix this, Dad. I will work for you. I will start at the bottom. I will be the janitor. I will scrub the floors. I swear. Just don't leave me here. I don't have a wallet. I don't have a phone. I am your son. You can't just leave your son in the rain." I looked at him. I looked deep into his eyes, searching for a spark of the boy who used to build Lego castles in the living room. But that boy was gone. In his place was a stranger who defined his worth by his address and his title. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry for what he had lost. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a rescue. I leaned forward slightly, bringing my face out of the shadows. "I did not take anything from you, Jason," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through the sound of the rain. "I simply took back what was mine. You lost the rest all on your own." No, Dad, listen. No, you listen, I interrupted. For 30 years, I tried to give you everything. I gave you an education. I gave you a safety net. I gave you a home. But I made a mistake. I shielded you from the one thing that builds character. Struggle. I let you think the world owed you something. Jason shivered violently, his teeth chattering. Dad, I am cold. I looked at his hands gripping the window frame. I gave you 2 hands to work, Jason, I said. And I gave you a heart to love. That was my job as a father. But look at what you did with them. I paused, letting the words hang in the damp air. You used your hands to strike your father. You used your hands to push me down. You used your hands to steal from the company that fed you. And your heart, you used your heart to store greed. You used it to harbor contempt for the weak. You filled it with so much arrogance there was no room left for decency. Jason sobbed, his head dropping onto his arms. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I know you are, I said. But sorry is a word. Change is an action, and you cannot change while you are sitting in the back of a limousine paid for by someone else. You cannot learn how to stand if I am always there to catch you. I reached out and placed my hand over his on the window frame. His skin was ice cold. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but I gently pushed his hand away from the glass. Use the rest of your life to learn how to be a human being, Jason. Start by feeding yourself. Start by earning $1 that you actually worked for. Start by understanding that dignity isn't something you buy. It is something you do. Dad and Mo don't. Goodbye, son. I pressed the button. The window began to rise. Jason grabbed at it, but the glass was relentless. It slid up, sealing the barrier between us. His voice was muffled, a distant cry in the storm. Drive, Stone! The car moved forward. I didn't look out the side window. I looked into the rearview mirror. I saw a small, dark figure standing in the middle of the wet street, illuminated by the red glow of the taillights. He grew smaller and smaller as we accelerated, shrinking, until he was just a speck in the distance, and then he was gone. Swallowed by the rain and the night. I sat back in the seat. The silence returned. I touched the empty seat beside me, the place where my wife should have been. I imagined her hand in mine. I imagined her telling me it was okay. A single tear rolled down my cheek. It was hot and heavy. I let it fall. I didn't wipe it away. It was the only inheritance I had left to give him. I looked forward toward the city lights that were waiting for me. I had a company to run. I had a legacy to rebuild. And somewhere out in the cold Chicago rain, my son had a life to start. For the first time, it was truly his own. As the city lights blurred past, I realized my greatest failure wasn't in business, but in fatherhood. I shielded Jason from the struggle that made me strong, thinking I was giving him a gift. Instead, I robbed him of his character. I taught him that value is something you inherit, not something you earn. True dignity isn't found in a title, a suit, or a house you didn't pay for. It is found in the calluses on your hands and the integrity in your heart. Don't build a ceiling for your children. Build a foundation even if they have to pour the concrete themselves. Sometimes you have to let them fall so they can finally learn how to stand. Do you think I was too harsh on my son, or was this the only way to save him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice served.